The heights of a hero's ambition are expressed deep within their tales. Many unfortunate souls see their stories told as a point of caution, encouraging listeners not to repeat their mistakes. Others complete their deeds and see the world bettered for their work, but their tales are forgotten with time, with the transition into new orientations remembered as a phenomenon of human nature. Then, there are the select few, those whose names are charted for generations to come, and their tales become so much more than a mere story, instead becoming known with the greatest honor a hero can hold, the impeccable status of legend. However, in the hands of every legend, there is the armament used to bend the world to their will. Across the lands between, there are 8 such weapons of this caliber, having been wielded by those who have left the largest mark on the world, each waiting for a fated tarnished to take them in hand once again and wield them in their ascension to Elden Lord. This is the tale of one such man of legend, who would take each of these weapons in hand and make his mark, one mythic victory at a time. Howdy, I'm Prakuza, and welcome to DevBox. Today we're going on a challenge run to answer a simple, but incredibly long-winded question. Can we beat Elden Ring while only using legendary armaments? Now, this question might not seem like it's really all too worth exploring on its head, but the total number of legendary armaments gives us an opportunity to do something I've never done in Elden Ring. Something that I feel like I need some real experience in before I continue to complain about it every chance I get. See, this is because we aren't going to be swapping between these weapons from one fight to the next, but instead from one playthrough to the next. That's right, we're heading into New Game Plus, as many times as there are legendary armaments. Considering that I've never done New Game Plus in Elden Ring before, and my last attempt at a New Game Plus build was so hilariously difficult in Bloodborne, I'm going to assume that I'm in for a world of pain, heading deeper into these cycles than I've ever gone across any Souls-like, either in the FromSoft originals, or any others like The Surge or Lies of P. This might be a bad idea. Well, no point in delaying any further. Let's go ahead and get this run started in earnest. We dress up old Dude McStreamson in his Sunday best, and prepare for Confession. That is to say, we're starting as the Confessor class, because it has the stat line that comes closest to the requirements of our very first weapon. This way, with the Lands Between rune as our starting gift, and a few trips to some nearby graveyards, along with the Golden Rune 12 in Fort Faroth, we should have enough levels to wield that weapon once we get it. And here it is, my old faithful Sword of Night and Flame. Haven't pulled this bad boy out since launch. I wonder if it's as amazing as I remember. Kinda. Yeah, our first weapon is Sonaf, not because it's the best weapon to choose from, or even because it's the easiest to create a build for. Nope, we've chosen this as our first piece of 8 because it is the only one that doesn't require us to kill anything to get it. Instead, all we've got to do is take a quick trip to Caria Manor, drop down this bridge, and the sword is kinda simply sitting there in a chest behind a locked door. Sort of an underwhelming find, but hey, that means we get our very first legendary armament to use without having to first use any other weapon in the meantime. Speaking of in the meantime, while our stats are certainly higher than we started, we aren't exactly ready to wield a weapon with a 24-point requirement in both intelligence and faith. So to supplement that, we've been collecting a few things to prepare our build for the first couple bosses. First, there's Marika's Scar Seal, which gives us 3 in all magic-y stats, including int and faith naturally. Although this is at the cost of some negative damage negation, which is to say it increases the damage that I will be taking. Then there's the relevant Not tiers for the Wondrous Physic, each of which grants 10 points to the required stat for 3 minutes. A huge boon, as long as I don't need to fight anything for more than 3 minutes. You know, like the bosses. The bosses that I need to kill to complete this run. The bosses made to be the milestones in progress for the game. Elden Ring's bosses. Well, speaking of Elden Ring's bosses, these are the hardest that FromSoftware has ever made, and many of them are more than willing to stall me for long enough that the tiers will most certainly wear out if my damage isn't completely on point. Fortunately, these legendary weapons are all upgraded with somber smithing stones, which means that we can pretty quickly boost our damage without too much trouble. All we have to do is gather a few somber stones in the Rye Lucaria Crystal Tunnel, one pickup right before fighting this troll. Can't believe I killed it at +0 without the stats to wield this weapon. A somber 4 on this man in a chair, and finally the 5 and 6 that can be found in Volcano Manor. Hey, you know, we took out that troll pretty easy, with an unupgraded weapon. Maybe the Godskin Noble will be the same. Yeah, I'm not really good at fighting this guy anyway, so I think maybe I'll come back. Never. Wonder if being bad at fighting Godskin guys is going to bite me in the ass later. Couldn't possibly. So, we've got an upgraded weapon, and we can use it for about 3 minutes at a time. Our health is pretty low, but we should have what it takes to beat Morgott and Godric. This isn't exactly one-shot levels of low vigor, but the low health does make the fight a bit touch and go for a minute there. Still, blowing through Stormvale Castle at record speed, we kill Morgott with a very fortunate stagger, but Godric actually winds up killing me for the first time in several runs. Take a second to get my bearings and really hone in on the Sonaf's strengths, or lack thereof since patch 1.02, and we eventually get the win. Thanks in no small part to another fortunate stagger at the start of Phase 2. Next up is Collectathon time. With Godric out of the way, we've got enough runes to be able to properly wield the Sonaf without needing the Not tiers. Although they will still offer a power boost thanks to the weapon's scaling. However, there are a handful of tiers that might offer us even better damage if we can run around and pick them up. That means we're hunting Erdtree avatars. Starting with the Putrid avatar near the entrance to Caelid. An easy kill grants us a decent boon to our fire damage, which will in turn make short work of the avatar near the jumping mausoleums, and even the Putrid in Dragon Barrow. These net us a magic damage boost tier and plenty of runes. Huge help for getting our vigor situation in order, especially since our lack of bleed means we can't cheese the Dragon Mama. I wish this was the end of collecting for this run, but honestly, that's pretty much the entirety of the Sonaf playthrough. We'll be going around and picking up every legendary armament we can in order to prepare for the upcoming New Game Plus cycles. That being said, we also won't be stopping to farm, either in this cycle or in any future ones. So keeping a hold of our runes is especially important. And this stipulation isn't necessarily a hard rule for the run, but an added incentive to make what might be my longest run to date a little bit faster. That, along with one more rule I'll be explaining when we get to the final boss fight. Anyway, our next step is to kill Radagon, which we've unlocked since we made our trip up to Atlas for Volcano Manor. No help for him this time. Yes, I've been remembering not to summon the boys for challenge runs. Thank you. I'm proud of myself for remembering too. Maybe Mom finally won't be ashamed of me. Oh wait, I'm a YouTuber. Can't win them all. We win against Radagon though. Not on the first try, but we get there all the same. With this, we get access to Nokron, although this is only half of the equation, since I also want Nokstella access. So no time to celebrate the Radagon victory, we've got to head right back to Caria Manor and take out Loretta and meet up with Ronnie. Giving her the Fingerslayer blade from Nokron then opens the way to Nokstella, where we can kill the Lesser Estelle. With that, we get a Somber 7, which combines with the Somber 8 and 9 in Caelid to give us a +9 Sonaf for the rest of this run. I'll note here too that I will also be grabbing some spares of each type of Somber Stone for future journeys. Yeah, we're not starting at +0 every single time. Some of these runs are going to be hard enough at +10, and I have a need for speed once we're doing New Game Plus cycles. After all, we have 8 of these to do. So, back to the Sonaf portion of the run. We're going to be pinging around from place to place for a while, and I'm going to try to keep the order to how I actually played this through as much as I can. But we might rattle off some stuff out of order for an easier flow to keep track of. That being said, now that we've got our endgame damage online, we can start looking for the rest of our build. This means getting some more quests taken care of. First, I head to Mount Gilnear so I can kill the Magma Worm and continue Alexander's questline. Gonna be honest, not sure if this part is required, but I feel like I never see him in Mountaintops if I don't visit him in the lava pool. So here we are. The now +9 Sonaf puts in some work, but the Ash of War definitely takes some time to get used to. Like, it's basically no different from Common Azure as far as the windup is concerned, but I'm not all too familiar with that, to be honest. Still, Magma Worm goes down and we make our way to get Alex moving. Then there's Leonin Mistbegotten. who we need to kill for the Grafted Blade Greatsword. And I immediately learned that I am trash at this fight. Super out of practice for the Misbegotten bosses. Good thing I don't have to fight 3 of the 4 boss variants for all the legendary armaments, especially if one has backup. Well, this one's dead all the same, and we're finally well on our way to get each of our various weapons. Next, we get the Lieutenant mission started, by talking to old Albus and picking our Albinoric waifu up. Quick and easy, kinda like Renala, who gives me a bit of difficulty this time due to both her high magic resistance and my low health. Well, low for any of my normal builds at this point in the game. This will help with the Ronnie questline later, but isn't too important for now. Continuing the optional boss list, we've also got Commander O'Neill to check off, which will let us start Millicent's quest and pick up her talisman for a nice 5-point bonus to Dex when we need it. Then there's the second Leonin Misbegotten, this one coming packed together with a Crucible Knight. This lands us the Ruin's Greatsword, another of our main weapons for a future journey. I take this down on my first try, but the two put up a hell of a fight, especially the Crucible Knight, since he loves to turtle up behind the shield and stall for ages. After that is Godfrey for the Godfrey icon, which will come in handy for a couple runs. Like, literally 2 of the total 8, but we aren't quite there yet. So put them in the back of your mind for a bit, while we move on to the any percent. So, Draconic Tree Sentinel doesn't put up much of a fight, mostly because this is a fight I'm much more practiced at. At this point, I've also gotten pretty comfortable with the Ash of War's fire-spraying R2. Even with the nerf, the weapon still does enough work to make it through without too much issue. The same also goes for Goldfrey. Granted, after spending so long learning his combos in the Lawnmower run, either version of Godfrey is basically all muscle memory. Fortunately, Sonaf has way more attack opportunities. So this goes by pretty quickly, even if I do greed a few Ash of War attacks at some risky moments. Then, we kill Morgott to finish off Lindell, before we get back into collecting mode. He's not easy, exactly, but I've also been getting better at fighting him too. Not good, mind, but better. That being said, the weapon itself is passing. It isn't the broken instant win button it was back at launch, but it's also not so broken that it doesn't function as a standard weapon. Now, Sonaf is kinda mid, but like, I've beaten this guy with worse and better, so there's little to say about it to be honest. Instead, let's get back to picking up the other legendary weapons that have way more to say about them. Next up is the Bolt of Grandsax, the only missable weapon in the bunch. Fortunately, I remember it before turning this place into Ashen Capital and don't have to worry about missing any of the legendary armaments on this initial run. As long as I don't rush myself through to Elden Beast, I've got as much time as I need to go around and gather up everything. Every single one. In this, the easiest of the upcoming 8 journeys with escalating difficulty as the entire experience goes on. After that, we head out to finish up the rest of Ronnie's questline in order to pick up the Moonlight Greatsword. This is probably the most disjointed I've ever done her quest, but I fit it in whenever I remembered, and to be honest, gathering up all of these weapons was splitting my attention real bad. Hard to focus when there's this many targets to keep track of all at once. Additionally, we can head into Mountaintops of the Giants and find the Eclipse Shuttle up in Castle Sol, while we kill Commander Nile to complete our Halig Tree Medallion and get Consecrated Snowfield access. Nile is surprisingly easy, actually. At least, I've gotten much better at actually fighting him. For anyone struggling with him, remember that Nile's combos always extend for at least 1 extra attack than you would usually expect. There will be time to punish after that final hit, but greeting what looks like an opening at first will always end with eating a swipe or a butt poke from that halberd. Also, he essentially always does an AoE after most of his charging frost attacks. These are not opportunities unless you have range, which Sonaf does, so congrats. Something this weapon is actually good at. With Nile dead, we can head to the Consecrated Snowfield and find the Golden Order Greatsword in the Cave of the Forlorn. Of course, we kill Theodorix on the way in, because I thought he was required. He wasn't. He killed me many times, and overall, he was a bad time to kill without some sort of percentage-based status effect to deal some extra damage. Always the case with these super tanky bosses. As for the Misbegotten Crusader, who is actually wielding the Golden Order Greatsword this time, he also kills me a few times. I think more than anything, I'm not super familiar with fighting these guys without a summon at my side. Which, by the way, I could ideally use Mimic Tear for this run if I really wanted, without considering it cheating. since he would also be using the same legendary armament as me. And since Mimic Tear is also a legendary Spirit Sign. So, it kinda works. But help is for people looking to have fun. This is a challenge run, and that's not good content unless I'm in pain. Oh, and the pain's a-comin'. Don't worry. Alright, we've got our next weapon, and we move on! That's pretty much all we can gather for now, so we head back to that good ol' any %, which means... Fire Giant. Now, at this point, I've noted how mid the Sonaf is, even now at plus 10 since I picked up a couple Ancient Dragon Smithing Stones from Consecrated Snowfield. At first, it actually doesn't seem so bad, as my attacks seem to do some pretty decent damage to his leg in the first phase. However, it's the phase 2 that really takes Fire Giant from annoying to frustrating. What was already pretty disappointing damage suddenly becomes abysmal, since the hands are nowhere near as vulnerable as the leg was, and they also can't be as consistently punished. It's much less hug the ankle and slash away, and a lot more bait out an attack and get one hit in at a time. And if you're really lucky, then you might dodge the pile driver correctly and actually get the chance to get some real damage out on the eye in his chest. Otherwise, this phase takes forever. And that's without considering how often he'll use one of his 3 stall attacks. The Volcano, the Flamethrower, or the Double Suns. Again, the Ash of War comes in clutch every once in a while, and we get it done. Speaking of the Ash of War, it seems to cause me some issues with our next boss, the Godskin Duo. Although I will note that my overall strat here could use some work. In some of the future runs, when I don't exactly have the leeway to take any hits, I realize the real core of the problem here. That being said, the Ash of War on the Sonaf is a bit of a problem in and of itself. While it has some stagger potential, it doesn't exactly do a ton of damage, and tends to hit both Apostle and Noble at the same time. So they both seem to be active together, instead of one hanging back while the other takes the front position. I mean, they've never really done that, but they've at least been much easier to separate in the past. Still, no matter how aggressive they are, they go down all the same. After killing the duo, we also get to finish up Alexander's questline by challenging him to an honest fight. This results in us getting the Alexander Jar Shard, the upgraded version of the Warrior's Jar Shard that improves the damage of Ashes of War. Would have been great to have this for Sonaf, since it has one of the better skills attached to it, but it's better for future runs to get the good version of this now for an easier time coming up. Minorly easier. Like, barely even really a moderate improvement. I'll tell you what is an improvement: fighting Malekith with a weapon that has even a tiny modicum of speed to it. I mean, I'm still trash at the Beast Clergyman phase, but I'm plenty decent at the big boy himself in the second phase. The opening and the overhead slam that I used in the lawnmower run is the bread and butter of this fight. He's by no means easy in either phase, one of the toughest of this run in fact, but I don't find myself stuck on him for too long. A well-placed Ash of War or two, and Marika's bestest boy goes down. Gideon has suddenly become one of the worst parts of any run recently. I don't know if I've been slipping on him, or if the weapons I'm choosing are what struggles, but this is a painful encounter. I probably spent more time on him than any of the surrounding bosses, and I'm counting Godskin Duo and Malekith among that group. His spell spamming rips me apart at every turn, and the poise damage on the Sonaf has no real way of actually causing him to flinch or interrupting his casting. At least, not enough that I feel confident to catch him before the spells pop out. Then there's the damage his spells do regardless of how much he spams them. Like, look at this shit. He dies, but that is some insane amount of damage I was taking. Alright, we're gonna go ahead and take that off right this fucking second, what the fuck? Next up is Godric, but this is our last chance to do some final gathering. And I've got one final legendary armament to grab before starting Journey 2. The Devourer's Scepter, which can only be taken from Bernie, who's already in Volcano Manor. And he won't come out until after I've killed Rykard. How's that look with the Sonaf? Not good. Okay, well, it wasn't going to be a part of the next run anyway. I'm saving the Scepter for later. So I suppose that will have to wait until Journey 2. We can kill him right at the start and correct that error. Man, super annoying to miss one of the 8 legendary armaments this late into the first journey. I mean, if I could use the Serpent Hunter, then he'd be no issue. But no can do for this challenge. Well, in the meantime, I've got 2 things to pick up in Halictree. All I've got to do is outrun the ants. Couldn't be an easier fucking task, right? Right? You all know how this goes. They kill me, I try again, I get the talismans I'm looking for. First is the Dragon Greatshield talisman, which will be sticking right there in the front spot for the next 20 hours this run is about to take. Then there's Marika's Sword Seal, which will help me bridge the gap between a few weapons needing a boost in magic-y stats. Now, with the final collection finished, and the 8th armament earmarked for our next adventure, it's time to put an end to Journey 1. That starts with Goldfrey, the best damn fight in this game. Let's go, old man!
Thy strength befits same crown.
We fucking take those. As for Radagon and Elden Beast, well, I tend to struggle against Radagon himself, and Sonaf doesn't exactly put me over the edge against him, so the struggle continues for a few failed runs in a row. However, once I make it to Elden Beast, that bastard bites it on the first try. As many times as I've fought this guy already, there's no way he could possibly kick my ass over and over for hours or days at a time. At least, not again. Not like my casual playthrough at launch. Well, that's the adventure, or at least the first part of it. First of 8. And with that, all of the foreshadowing for how the rest of this run works out ends. Let's actually get into the difficult part. But hey, we're already, 22 minutes into this video? Maybe we can speed this up from here. To start, we've already finished picking up all of the gear we need for all future runs. Or at least the stuff I could remember on my disheveled initial fever dream with Sonaf. So, we'll be doing an any percentage run from start to finish of Journey 2 and on. This will include Grafted Scion to test the new weapons, Rennala, Godric, Morgott, Fire Giant, Maliketh, Godfrey, and finally Radabeast. In between these are also Red Wolf of Radagon, Morgott, Draconic Tree Sentinel, Goldfrey, Godskin Duo, and Gideon. Since they are required to reach the others because we aren't using any glitches or pretty much any skips. In this case, for the structure of the video, to keep things from getting boring and repetitive, we're going to break down each boss in order, running through what made each weapon unique against each boss, which I'm gonna be honest, for a lot of these, wasn't much. I'm gonna be saying the Ash of War isn't really useful, and not a lot of stagger potential, a lot. Like, I haven't actually written that part in the script yet, but it is all I see in the cascade of notes that I'm reading through on my phone right now. That being said, many of these weapons are an absolutely painful experience, and I made several mistakes on my pathing that caused the end of this whole adventure to fucking kill me. Some of you might have already clued in to what that is. So, starting right out, we've got Grafted Scion, and the first fight against him is probably the most difficult in the set, since I completely forgot to upgrade my weapon for Journey 2. Also, yes, I'll be referring to these as Journeys 2 through 8 from here on, since it helps keep track easier than New Game Plus, and New Game Plus 2, and so on. Since the last one has a 2 in it, but it's actually the third playthrough of the game, and it's confusing, and the journey numbers is easier. Anyway, as the B-roll has been going, you're probably seeing the pretty abysmal damage here, and have now been completely confirmed that the Eclipse Shottle is in fact the worst legendary armament in the game. but it's not really that bad. We'll get to that later. For Journey 2, we've got the Golden Order Greatsword. You might be noticing a theme here. Both Journeys 2 and 3 include the Holy damage weapons, which were chosen to be the first couple run-throughs since Holy is the worst damage type, especially against the final few bosses. Against Grafted Scion though, it blasts right through. For Journey 4, we've got the Devourer's Scepter, which I got from killing Bernie with the Eclipse Shuttle. Not to rob the Scepter its time, but interesting fact about the Eclipse Shuttle, it is one of few ways for players to use Deathblight on enemies, a status that doesn't affect bosses, and the majority of enemies that it actually will affect die too quickly once I level it to plus 10, but not Bernie. He gets lifted the fuck up on that route, and as a reward, I get a weapon that delivers a big smash. For Journey 5, we've got the Grafted Blade Greatsword, which delivers an even bigger smash. Oh my god, this weapon fucking rocks. Grafted Scion can't keep up. For Journey 6, we've got the Ruins Greatsword, the quote-unquote noob weapon, and yeah, it also fucking rips. And by that, I actually mean it rips the shit out of Grafted Scion's asshole. For Journey 7, we've got one of my favorite weapons in all of Elden Ring, the Bolt of Grand Sax. Look at this badass red lightning throw. How am I supposed to not love this weapon? Well, we'll get to that, actually. But for now, it does a good job of ripping Scion up pretty well. Finally, for our last journey, we've got my absolute favorite weapon in any thing ever. A weapon I love so much, it makes a cameo in my book. The the Dark Moon Greatsword. Well, hey, at least the Moonlight name appears in the Ash of War, and it absolutely shreds Scion. Look at that sweet, sweet damage. Okay, all of my fawning over for now. Let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of this run. Straight on to the next boss, because that's what I did for the next several runs in a row. No getting sidetracked, except for this sick Bernie kill once. And no more collectathon. It's boss gauntlet from start to finish. So, how's Red Wolf of Radagon fare against a bunch of plus 10 legendary weapons? Well, this seems like a good time to mention how I've actually been wielding these in the first place. See, as a result of needing to jump straight from killing Elden Beast in the previous journey straight into the next journey, my initial builds until I can respec lean heavier towards the last weapon I was using. So for a lot of these weapons, I'm not getting much in the way of scaling, and I'm likely using either talismans or not tiers to supplement my lacking stats. Sometimes both. That being said, Red Wolf isn't exactly a huge problem on most runs. Most. With the Eclipse Shuttle, the weapon is significantly faster than my previous Sonaf, and the damage per hit is kind of comparable, which actually gives this one the edge on DPS as a regular weapon. Of course, it's hard to measure the two up against each other on an enemy this early, since the Shuttle is now plus 10, and the Sonaf hadn't quite gotten there yet. But we'll get back to that later. Golden Order Greatsword is much more in my wheelhouse of greatswords, but Red Wolf is very fast. But holy damage is actually good against Red Wolf. But we're also now in Journey 3. It's really up in the air, but otherwise not very difficult. Also, the Ash of War is basically useless in this fight. Much too slow. Once again, the Devourer's Scepter offers some massive smash. Red Wolf's speed means we can only really get one hit off at a time, but that is more than enough to absolutely crush this doggo. The Grafted Greatsword is the same as the Spectre. Unbelievable smashing power. And popping the Ash of War's buff at the start of the fight means running in with the strength of Godrick's Great Rune at my fingertips. Honestly, the best Ash of War in the run so far, but we'll get to some of the others later. While the emphasis on magic damage might limit the Rune's Greatsword a bit, the weapon's physical damage handily overtakes that magic resistance. Another slow Ash of War against an otherwise speedy enemy, although the damage is good enough to warrant looking for an opportunity to use it. Again, the raw damage clearly overtakes the limitations of damage types in this area. Then there's the Bolt of Grand Sax, which is doing its job. And the red lightning throwing is cool, but by Journey 7, the low damage makes this one of the toughest Red Wolf fights in the run. Still, we soldier on and get through the doggo all the same. Finally, we've got the Dark Moon Greatsword. Hell yeah! I think this might be my first death against Red Wolf throughout the run. But that's definitely on me for not being used to the timing of the beam attack and relying way too heavily on the charge R2s for some extreme damage. Once I hone in on the rhythm, the blunder passes and we move forward. With Red Wolf down, it's a quick trip to Rennala. This is going to go similarly, except not a single attempt ends in failure. So, for pretty much every run from here on out, all of Raya Lucaria is little more than a speed bump. For Journey 2, the Eclipse Shottle's Ash of War doesn't do much to inflict Death Blight on the boss, but it does increase the holy damage, which Rennala is very weak to. So this is one of the faster fights, as the holy damage from the Shottle absolutely melts her, only stopping me briefly between bubbles in the first phase and summoning spirits in the second. For Journey 3, the Golden Order Greatsword is the same as the Shottle, but now even stronger. Also, Rennala is much slower than Red Wolf, which means that we finally got some good uses of the Ash of War. It's a pretty interesting 2-input attack. First an AoE explosive, then with the second input, the weapon sends out a Holy Blade Beam, not unlike the Moonlight Greatsword. Oh right, because it kind of is. Only it was gifted from Rennala to Radagon, and then he threw it into a cave. This feels uniquely cruel. Moving on. For Journey 4, the Devourer's Scepter is once again putting in some heavy work, smashing right through the first phase in one cycle. Even this many New Game Pluses in. Nothing on this run is really immune or resistant to fire damage, so that's pretty much an all-around benefit for the any percent. I thought the Ash of War might be fun against the students though, and it really doesn't have a lot of utility in most other boss fights. Now, I'm not sure if I never figured out how to really utilize it or not, but the thing simply works best as a beat stick, and that's kinda it. The Ash of War hardly seems useful, even here against a bunch of minor enemies all grouped up into one room. For Journey 5, the Grafted Blade is once again an absolute unit, getting the kill so fast that there isn't even time to stagger, and getting through the first phase in a single cycle. Now that is some tasty damage. It almost seems to chunk her life away in similar increments to the Devourer's Scepter, possibly putting it a little over the edge as far as raw damage is concerned. For Journey 6, the Ruin's Greatsword's magic damage hardly gives it a disadvantage here. Once again, we've got a one-cycle Rennala, certainly helped by the extra spikes from the Charge R2. More on those later, actually. They come in clutch down the line. Then for Phase 2, the Ash of War bullies the shit out of her. For Journey 7, the damage from the Bolt of Grandsax is serviceable, as always. We aren't able to beast through Phase 1, but the steady damage and my moderate familiarity with the weapon still get us through. I should say also, this is one of the longest fights so far, since I didn't simply smash the hell out of her. For the final journey, this is one of the roughest fights, with the magic resistance really bringing down the total damage potential of the Dark Moon Greatsword. It's another long fight, and the range on the Moonlight Greatsword Ash of War doesn't exactly excite. Among the tougher Rennalas for sure, but we make it through all the same. Now that we've got Rennala down, each of the runs gets to respec and pump their damage up to the next level. I also get to stop using the Not Tears and Stat Enhancement Talismans. So, once we get to our next boss, we're basically already at our new peak with each weapon. And the next boss is Morgott. A bit out of order, but necessary to get the runs online quickly. These are basically speedruns at this point, and I am all about that speed. Mostly because I want to finish this video in a timely manner. Who wants to bet I still won't be working on the edits for this video until Thursday? Anyway, we're off to Morgott, and the Eclipse Shottle makes quick work of him. Even though I already did this with a straight sword right before this, the speed of the Eclipse Shottle is a nice change of pace for how my last couple of runs have gone. Really shreds through Morgott, although I'm still having trouble giving up on the R2 spam. I'll get there. Morgott doesn't fare much better against the Golden Order Greatsword. I'd have thought that his enhanced holy defense would have made this more difficult, but even in Journey 3, any plus 10 Somber is more than enough to shred him. I even manage an Ash of War or two. Really wish this attack was faster, or had some hyper armor. Then I might consider using it more. For now, it's a little more than a flex. By the time we get this far in the Devourer's Scepter run, it becomes quickly obvious why the two holy weapons were finished with early. The heavy physical and minor fire damage from the Scepter continues to outpace the holy, even after the increased health from one run to the next. Big smash smashes big. Bigger smash though? That smashes even bigger. The Grafted Blade is quickly becoming one of my favorite weapons. I never gave it much of a chance since I didn't really care for the Ash of War, but the buff helps me to absolutely pummel Morgott. The same goes for the Ruin's Greatsword. Honestly, this weapon is so good I might be interested in a more standard run using it as my primary weapon. Not for a video. For fun. Maybe I'll even power stance it with the Grafted blade. Both deliver the biggest smashes that absolutely dominate Morgott. And here we are again, back to the weak link in the chain. While this run hasn't removed Bolt of Grandsax as one of my favorite weapons in the game, I definitely recognize that it isn't exactly the best weapon. At least, not when two-handing it against Journey 7 strength enemies. It continues to be serviceable, but is nowhere near actually being as powerful as the previous runs. For all the hype from the Grafted Blade and Ruin's Greatsword, imagine my sheer disappointment that one of my actually preferred weapons fails so spectacularly to live up. Finally, the Darkmoon Greatsword is great and a sword, completely earning its name. Honestly, with the damage I'm doing here, it's hard to believe that this is actually the game at its highest possible difficulty. By that I mean enemies are stronger and tankier than ever, although not much else has really changed into deeper New Game Plus cycles. Regardless, Morgott goes down one final time, and we continue through Stormveil the fast way. With only a few minutes between Morgott and Godric, we hardly even have time to make a proper transition. So, Eclipse Shottle on Godric. It sure is a curved sword that does holy damage. We're barely into the real meat of the any percent, and I've kind of run out of things to say about this weapon. The speed is pretty nice, but that's about it. Otherwise, nothing about it is very special against most bosses. It kinda strikes me as a weapon built for PvP or NPC fights, as opposed to regular progression. That might even explain its endgame placement, to be honest. Anyway, onto an interesting weapon. The Golden Order Greatsword. It is exhausting saying the whole thing every time. How about a nickname? Let's go with Goldie. So Goldie has a decent time against Godric. Nothing spectacular, but I get a few Ash of War opportunities, so that's pretty cool. Especially in the phase transition. Anytime I get to use that Holy Moonlight Beam is fantastic. Like a preview of the fun to come. As for the Devourer's Scepter, the fun has most certainly arrived. For every time that I comment on enjoying the speed of the Eclipse Shottle, my brain sees the big chunky damage from the Devourer's Scepter, and that sends me nothing but the hot neuron reactions. Especially if I can fit a stagger into the fight. Also, Godric is simple enough that spamming charge and jump R2s is absolutely viable, as long as you bait out some of his bigger attacks. Moving on, we've got old Grafted. Grafty? We'll go with Grafted. It works. In fact, it even works on Godric, and his mangled, grafted ass. Rips him right to pieces, which I guess is fitting, unlike his weird limbs. Regardless, big smash! And another weapon later, we've got the biggest of smashes! Not gonna lie, these 3 playthroughs back to back to back were almost cathartic, with the way they completely devour these bosses. Old Ruin here is no exception, as it stomps Godric into the dirt. Hell, it brings the dirt up to him for good measure. And there's this asshole. I mean this beautiful Bolt of Grandsax, which I love, still a favorite. It's not copium. You can't prove that, and neither can this damage. I mean, hey, let's look at the cool lightning throw. Isn't it awesome? It's totally awesome. Well, at least I don't need to cope for the Darkmoon here. This thing This thing simply slaps the shit out of everything. Like, it barely even feels like this is New Game Plus, let alone far enough into the cycles that we're at max difficulty. Godric is no exception, and he drops as fast to the Moonlight as he lasted long against the Ancient Dragon Lightning. Which is to say, really quickly, because the bolt was really slow. You know what, pretend I said something clever and go ahead and laugh to yourself. Yeah, that's better. Goodbye, Godric! Alright, with Godric dead, we're ready to head back up into Altus Plateau and make our approach online delve. That means fighting the Draconic Tree Sentinel, and yep, we pretty much know exactly how this goes. In fact, let's lightning round this one. Eclipse, high speed, GG easy. Goldie, low speed, GG easy. Devourer, big smash. Grafted, bigger smash. Ruin, biggest smash. Bolt, piddly damage, real fight. Darkmoon, magic supremacy. Yep, we're right into the capital and already fighting Goldfrey. No time to waste. So, how does the shuttle work against Goldfrey? Well, not as bad as I was prepared for, considering that the Gold Spirit is at least somewhat resistant to holy damage. But the innate physical and the speed more than make up for it. Keep the aggression up and hammer on his slow combos, and we're good to go. Goldie struggles a little on damage, at least compared to previous fights. Also, Goldfrey is a much later fight than any of the bosses we've been facing up until now, so he's already starting to hit mid to late game balancing. In that case, I'm already prepared for some extra difficulty here. Either way, he isn't that difficult, and we secure a win. Devourer finally starts to actually shine with the upcoming fights, given that it is finally able to stagger enemies. Most of the bosses before Goldfrey kinda died before I could get a good riposte off. Goldfrey, however, he's got that big thick boy health bar and can finally be brought to his knees at least once. After that, he doesn't last long. Grafted is in a similar situation, finally being able to bring some killer stagger potential to the table and start doing some work against these later game bosses. This is what I'd been hoping to see in earlier fights too, but for the most part, a lot of them died too quickly. A real woe is me issue for these monster weapons, huh? Of course, Ruin is in the same boat as the previous two, a monster of damage and stagger potential that blasts right through Goldfrey's defenses, especially with those punishes I found on Axe Phase Godfrey during the lawnmower run. The slow speed of Ruin is basically inconsequential. Then we come back around to Bolt of Gransax. One thing I haven't really mentioned about the weapon yet is its speed, which is moderately okay, although I will note that it can be, and will be, getting better later on. I've decided on a poor decision here, two-handing the weapon, which is what is partially keeping that speed and damage to the moderate level. That means that while Goldfrey isn't specifically a problem, it is a long fight, mostly because I'm using this weapon poorly. Finally is the victory lap that is the Dark Moon run, and in proper Moonlight fashion, it absolutely demolishes Goldfrey. Honestly, this felt so cathartic after so many playthroughs, and especially after the Bolt run, to have accidentally saved the strongest weapon until the end, especially since for some reason, my specific build doubles the strength of my Charge R2s, with no explanation. With Goldfrey dead, we're moving fast and furious to Morgott. Let's see how that rolls out. Honestly, the Eclipse Shottle was a bit of a dark horse for most of the run. I'd heard it's not the greatest weapon in the game, with a lot of people calling it the worst of the legendary armaments. And while I kind of understand that with the lackluster Ash of War, it's a decent weapon all around, even against Morgott. With his relatively high holy resistance, the weapon is still managing some decent DPS, as long as I keep aggression up and maximize on its speed. Goldie is a different story, where I hadn't really heard much about it, nor was I expecting much out of it, thanks to the holy damage. That being said, Morgott is no more difficult than normal with it. The only issue I have here is that the Ash of War is almost useless. Both because it is slow, but also from the fact that it is almost pure holy damage. So, it gets its damage reduced by quite a bit. Still, it manages fine against Morgott. Starting up the Big Smash trio, Devourer is the first to abandon the holy damage and bring some heavy stagger potential to Morgott. This will be the theme of all three Smashers moving forward. As y'all might be able to tell, that makes Morgott fairly easy for these massive weapons, Devourer included. Grafted's bigger smash does its job and continues to put Morgott on his knees. The buff is nice, but continues the same trend for so many of these legendary armaments. These Ashes of War are nice, some are cool, but so few are either fun or the optimal strat for the weapon. The former is the case for Grafted, even if it is a blanket improvement. I like a little more flash, and Grafted doesn't really supply. Ruin, on the other hand, that puppy is almost pure flash. Between the spikes from the Charge R2 to the Power Geyser Ash of War, Ruin is the epitome of rule of cool. This is easily the second best playthrough of the run, and it quickly buckles Morgott. He hardly even knows what hits him, before I've crushed him with this sharpened chunk of Faramazula. Then, after 3 dick swinging adventures in a row, we've got Bolt, which is still a great weapon. It's only not great for this specific situation. Don't take Bolt of Gransax into Journey 7. Use it in other playthroughs, where it can really shine. I will die on this hill, huffing my copium. And finally, we put Morgott down for good with the absolute insane damage that Dark Moon is able to accomplish. There are no faults I can even think to give this weapon. It is amazing, and I love it. Thank who or whatever decided to make this one of the best weapons in the game, and one of the best versions of the Moonlight Greatsword in FromSoft history. No time to rest. Fire Giant, now! Ha! This is the first boss to give most of these weapons any issues, but none of them are really unique to the weapons themselves, only to the boss. In Journey 2, Eclipse only struggles in so much that the fight takes forever, since I've got to deal with the boss having tons of health. However, that's kind of an issue for almost every one of these legendary armaments. Like, we've got no bleed, no poison, and for the Eclipse, only the addition of holy damage, and a death blight that doesn't affect the boss. So, it's Fire Giant without something to mitigate his massive health pool. He's tough, but nothing I'm not ready for. The Journey 3 fight is exactly the same as the one before. Goldie has a little bit more opportunity to actually get a stagger or two, but it has nowhere near the stagger potential of the later weapons in the run. So it's mostly dodge, hit, repeat until your brain rots. For Journey 4, Devour is at a pretty unique disadvantage for the first time this playthrough, as Fire Giant is unsurprisingly resistant to fire. However, it's only a small part of the weapon's overall damage, so it really isn't that much of a problem. What is a problem is any attempt to stagger, because staggering phase 1 only makes him grab his knee and actually reduce the TPS, and staggering phase 2 is heavily RNG dependent. Much of Journey 5 is a reflection of the previous fight. Grafted has little issue dealing with raw damage, but the stagger potential that is this weapon's biggest benefit doesn't really work out too well here. This is one of the first times that any of these big smashers have failed to deliver, likely with the increasing cycle of New Game Pluses directly to blame, because it seems like boss poise is also increased alongside damage and health. Arriving on Journey 6, we are similarly greeted with an all too familiar fight with no real way to make it go any faster aside from increased aggression. Of course, Fire Giant is the king of stalling and will therefore make this fight take forever. And that's when I'm doing halfway decent damage. It's Journey 7 that really delivers the swiftest kick in the balls so far though. Not because it's hard, or at least not only because he's extremely strong and tanky, but also because this fight takes forever. The Ancient Lightning Spears do a lot of work, as long as Fire Giant doesn't decide to constantly roll away, or use every ranged attack in the book. From fire spewing to the volcano, it's a bombastic finish for sure, with the Lightning Spears almost earning the dub on their own, but a drawn-out one nonetheless. I couldn't imagine a worse weapon to bring all the way into the most difficult New Game Plus cycles. I don't know, maybe like the Regalia of Eocade? Or, wait, doesn't that weapon have a bigger variant? Wait, what? The big spinny greatsword is a legendary armament? Shit! Okay, well, gotta go kill Elmer now. In Journey 7. This might be the worst day of my life. Well, Elmer is big and, strong, but Bolt of Gransack still manages to get the job done. And we get the secret, hidden, super, not included in the wiki, and something I could have looked up 20 hours of gameplay ago, Mirai Executioner's Blade. Fuck. Alright, guess there's nothing to do now but get us up to date on how this weapon has been performing on the bosses up until now. We'll lightning round it and go. Grafted Scion, the only New Game Plus death against this guy for the run. How sad. Red Wolf, the damage is abysmal since the build was originally planned to be passing from Bolt to Darkmoon, so it takes a hot minute. Renala, the Executioner's Blade, gets its bonus damage from magic, which as we've seen before does not fare well against her. Nearly a death, but we make it through. Morgott, not much to write home about, but the damage hasn't really increased much after resetting the build to optimize for the weapon. Godric, it's Godric. What's he gonna do? Die on me? Draconic Tree Sentinel, not exactly easy, but not exactly hard either. At least the Greatsword has better damage than the spear. The regular bolt, not the lightning throw. That thing ranks Mariah's by a long shot. Goldfrey, one of few times it's relevant to mention the Ash of War, since the overhead spin sometimes gives the opportunity to pull it out. It doesn't really deal enough damage to be worth how long it takes to pull off, at least for the charged version. Plus, even with this massive opening, the ending slash is basically always asking to get hit. Morgott, certainly not a first try victory, and one of the early indicators that a regular old greatsword might still have some stagger potential. But it isn't exactly going to be a bread and butter this far into the new game cycles. Fire Giant. Awesome, we've caught up. A miserable experience as the winning attempt ends up taking almost 9 full minutes. The damage is about as bad as Bolt, but the attacks are slower. It's rough. Okay, so we're finally back to Fire Giant, and I can give a little breakdown of how it went for Moonlight. Again, the sword performs admirably. Also, while none of the other weapons in this massive challenge have anything resembling a useful status effect, the Moonlight Ash of War applies frost to all attacks. So, we actually manage a proc or two, and the strongest fire giant yet goes down in almost record speed. This close to the end, and we had to run back and find our 9th legendary armament. Honestly, I'm disappointed in you guys and gals out there watching. Why did none of you tell me? I shouted that there were 8 of these things with my whole chest like a dozen times. Fuck, this is so embarrassing. You know what? Let's go ahead and rush over to Godskin Duo. Maybe everyone will forget while I get creamed. Alright, we're back to the Eclipse Shuttle, and it's fine against the Godskin Duo. At this point, I'm honestly surprised how well this weapon is holding up this far into Journey 2. Like, it's still Godskin Duo, and they still kick my ass for a while, but the Shuttle is still a decently powered curved sword. No complaints. Goldie is a similar situation, especially considering that I'm very familiar with fighting with greatswords. Again, no complaints, but also nothing special to write home about. Devourer is up next, and as anyone who has ever summoned Bernie for this fight before can confirm, the Big Smash does pretty well against the duo. On that note, I will say Bernie's choice of weapon would make summoning him allowed for the challenge, since he does technically use the Scepter. Kind of like how the Mimic tier would also count, since they also use whatever legendary armament we're currently using. Still, that's a total baby move, so it probably won't be coming up. Onto our portable Iron Throne. Man, I need to catch up on that show. Only made it to Season 2. Is it any good? Well, the multi-sword inspired weapon is fantastic, as it smashes right through the duo and can land enough staggers on each individual Godskin to break them down before they can get back up. Next is Ruin, which offers the biggest smash yet. Again, it's still the duo and not easy, but even at Journey 6, this isn't too much trouble. Although the pressure of the 2 bosses does make utilizing the Ash of War difficult. Not impossible, but rarely optimal. Of course, after all of those easy mode weapons, we've got Bolt of Grandsax, the best weapon in all of the lands between. Nothing has ever been better than this weapon. Look at that damage. Look at how it makes this fight take forever. Look at how it makes sure that I get to keep playing Elden Ring. Even when I think I'm tired of being in this fight, good old Bolty is like, "Hey there, bud. I believe in ya. Keep it up." And with a slurry of fireball and crushed blue chew, I keep this shit up. 1 hour man? That's for babies. Call me the 1 month man. Well, as unhinged as that might have gotten, it isn't even the worst fight against these two that I have to deal with. That title goes to the Executioner's Blade. This thing is not up to the challenge of Journey 8. There, I finally set a journey number past 7. The ruse is finished, and so am I. Finished with actually putting up with this shit. Fun fact, this whole run took me roughly 47 hours from Sonaf to Darkmoon. And about 10 of those hours were spent on this one specific fight. It's terrible. Terrible enough that I go ahead and take that lifeline I'd given myself earlier. Not by going back and grabbing the Mimic tier, but by summoning Bernie. Yeah, it somewhat violates the spirit of the challenge, but since he still uses a legendary armament, it's still technically correct. The best kind of correct. Besides, Bernie didn't even survive the whole fight. Alright, we're finally on Journey 9, the Darkmoon one. The one where I deal insane amounts of damage, even though this is the Godskin duo at the strongest they get without mods. Honestly, my favorite playthrough of this entire run, and completely validating for loving the Moonlight Greatsword in all FromSoftware games. Except Evergrace, because I didn't bother to pick it up. Anyway, the duo is finally dead, and we get to make our move onto our next major enemy. Onward to Malekith. Not much to say about the Draconic Tree Sentinel in front of him, by the way. He doesn't manage to kill any of these runs, and is basically identical to the one from earlier on. Nothing new to be said, and this is already dragging on too long. So, does our faith-build shuttle manage to eclipse Malekith? I mean, it beats him, but at this point in the run, I'm still not extremely confident in fighting either the Armored Pupper or the more religious first phase. In fact, Beast Clergyman is more difficult for me these days than phase 2. Still, the damage isn't bad and the speed helps out even if this is the hardest fight so far. Following the shuttle, Goldie also has more trouble against Malekith than against any other boss. The damage isn't great, and I'm still struggling against Beast Clergyman at this point. Let's go ahead and assume that this skill issue struggle is going to continue for a while here. So while it's definitely beatable with the weapon, even a few New Game Plus cycles in, this is certainly one of the worst road bumps here. Next up is the start of the Smashy Boys, and Devourer makes quick work of both phases. However, while we're now far enough into the run that the high stagger potential of the weapon should give us some benefits, a lack of available punish windows means that a full stagger and riposte aren't entirely common. Bigger Smash also struggles with Maliketh's speed, but the raw damage overcomes the lack of meaningful damage opportunities, especially when making good use of jump R2s, instead of charge attacks to try getting some quick stagger damage in throughout the fight. Then, on phase 2, the overhead slam gives plenty of time for a charge R2. Biggest Smash holds the same struggles, but at this point, I start getting more familiar with Maliketh, and especially with the Beast Clergyman phase. It's never really gotten easy, but at this point I've got the muscle memory needed to keep from taking too many hits. Which is great, since by Journey 6, we're almost getting one-shot or wombo comboed by most anything Maliketh throws out. It has come to my attention that I may have been a touch overzealous for the Bolt of Grandsax in the previous segment. For that, I would like to apologize to any viewers who may have come under the impression that the Bolt of Grandsax is the greatest weapon ever created by mankind or of all time. To clarify, I would like to say, the Bolt of Grandsax is the greatest gift given to this sullied earth by whatever celestial being has deigned humanity worth. Given how terribly the Executioner's Blade did against Godskin Duo, is it even a surprise that Maliketh is a complete pain in the ass? Well, he is. Not as bad as the previous fight, somehow, but he's still enough of a pain to really ruin my whole day. Had it not already been ruined by the fight that came right before it. I'd speak more on it, but at this point my notes are only a series of screaming noises, which is weird, because I write my notes in text. I didn't even know this app had access to my speakers. If there is anything that defines the Dark Moon playthrough as a victory lap, it is how easily it blows through Maliketh. Have I mentioned at this point that the Ash of War also massively increases this weapon's stagger potential? Because it sure does. In fact, this run, all the way in Journey 9, is better about staggering Maliketh than any of the big smashers that came before. That, on top of the frostbite damage, makes for the easiest fight against this boss so far. Alright, we're past what should be the worst obstacle in the run. Time for the final boss rush through Ashen Capital. Hey, how about we go for another lightning round for Gideon? One part because I don't really care to give him more words than he already spews when he dies, and a second part because I'm starting to get sick of repeating myself about how boring and non-unique most of these weapons are in this format. Eclipse Shuttle, better than Sonaf somehow. Goldie, GG easy, but Gideon's magic spam always beats out my Ash of War. Devour, big smash. Grafted, bigger smash. Ruin, biggest smash. But Ash of War is also basically useless because of the magic spam. Bolt, the world's best weapon. Mirai, total garbage but passable. Dark Moon, fucking amazing. Alright, the many Gideons are down, with only a few deaths. I honestly don't even remember how many or how few. He has so little space in my mind, I live off the rent he has to pay me. Which is great, since YouTube doesn't. Penultimate boss time! Not as fun as a finale, but hey, someone's gotta come up second. Although, I've still gotta say, Godfrey is first in my heart. Mostly for not tacking on a bullshit second phase after the end of his health bar. Anyway, how does the fight go? Honestly, this was supposed to be the massive difficulty spike right at the end that was supposed to make the Eclipse Shuttle too weak to take into later runs. However, it's really not that bad. He's not even as difficult as Maliketh, even in phase 2. As has been the case for most other fights, Goldie isn't too far from the Eclipse Shuttle. Sure, it's slower and a larger portion of the damage is holy, as opposed to physical. However, the damage is still enough to keep this fight from lasting long enough to make a war of attrition impossible. Especially since it's still barely fast enough to not have to trade blows. I mean, technically nothing requires trading blows, but at my skill level, well... Anyway, next up is the Devourer, which really has nothing unique to say when it comes to Godfrey. It's got the stagger potential to drop him at least once, but I'm not super aggressive with the giant weapons. So it's not the best. Grafted has many of the same struggles as Devourer. The big smashy boys are all deep in trading blows territory unless I'm playing completely passively and slowly. Not as difficult as Maliketh, but still a challenge. To finish off our Big Smash trio with Biggest Smash, Ruin actually has a few opportunities to get some Ashes of War off, which helps to make up for a lot of the damage. Also, the unique Charge R2 comes in clutch in this fight, landing a stagger to save my bacon right before Godfrey gets the chance to fry me up good. With the good weapons out of the way, we're back to the Bolt of Grandsax, which I have learned works much better when held in one hand than in two. For one, it seems to have much better reach in this stance, and it attacks quite a bit faster. Also, this allows for turtling behind a shield, but I try not to use it too much since that's not really a legendary armament, so it doesn't exactly feel like it honors the spirit of the run, even if the turtle shield has been on my back this entire time. Also, there has never been a weapon as glorious. Well, we're almost at the end, and it feels like I've had nothing good to say about the Mirai Executioner Blade. That's because there's nothing really good to say about it. I'm sure on a new game run, rushing over and picking this weapon up might make for an interesting playthrough. But on Journey 8, with my brain already fried from having speedran this game 6 times in a row? No, there is nothing good worth saying about this weapon. Godfrey isn't as bad as Gods Can Do or Malekith at least. Then, to wind down the victory lap, Dark Moon absolutely obliterates Godfrey. The Frostbite, the staggers, the ranged attacks to try hitting him while he erupts the ground, everything about this weapon is perfect. No notes. This is the easiest run since the Smashy Boys. Love it, love Godfrey, starting to actually love Elden Ring at this point. Alright, we're here. The last boss of the game. I feel like I've shaved years off of my life at this point, but we're almost there. At the end of the line. No more build-up. Let's get into this. At the same time, I'm going to give my final thoughts on each of these weapons and whether or not I would suggest each one as they make it through the fight. So, how does Eclipse Shottle fare against Radagon and Elden Beast? Well, it's definitely not the strongest weapon I've ever used, but it isn't exactly useless. Considering what I've heard about this weapon, I was expecting to struggle a lot more. As for the recommendation for the weapon in general, I mean, sure, I guess. I wouldn't say to stay away entirely. In fact, it could be a really interesting way to handle NPC fights, since the Deathplight can kill them pretty fast. But as far as the weapon or the Ash of War buff goes, there are a lot of better somber weapons to choose from, and much better curved swords to go with. Still, no reason to be afraid of the holy damage on this one. It's still a decent enough weapon. Next up is Goldie. Against Radagon, this one feels almost cathartic to use. The exact opposite of having used it against Renala. Maybe I have an extra level of appreciation for the Carrion royal family because of Ronnie, but it does feel pretty nice to beat Radagon with the weapon his ex-wife gifted him and he abandoned. Otherwise, it doesn't exactly shine against Radagon or Elden Beast, outside of lore significance. As for the recommendation, I'll give this one a hearty sure. Like, the Ash of War is really cool and makes for some epic flexes on some bosses, but the 2-part hit is way too slow to be useful without some pretty substantial poise, and later fights make it completely useless without looking for specific punish windows. I don't even know how to describe Devourer's Scepter. I mean, the fire damage does good against both Radagon and Elden Beast, but it's so little of the actual damage that it doesn't really matter. I also never managed to get an Elden Stars skip with this one. Mostly because I actually stagger Elden Beast too quickly. As for using the weapon throughout the rest of the game, it's whatever. I honestly don't know when the Ash of War will be useful, and I didn't bother to fully test it out. So, for anyone who's used this thing more and would like to suggest it, go ahead, sound off in the comments. For me though, I'll give it a pass. Leave Bernie alone and let him go about his journey, until he invades you, then kill him. To start with the Grafted Blade Greatsword, yep, it sure does smash Radagon and Elden Beast. Also staggering Elden Beast before he can manage to get Elden Stars out. Yeah, I'm not very good at timing those staggers. Still, it makes it through to the end game in no time at all. As for the recommendation, yep, this is my first 100% would recommend. No caveats, nor other considerations to make. Although I will say that it's one of the more boring weapons, since the Ash of War is only really a buff, which gives a temporary boost, similar to Godrick's Great Room. So, it is at the same time impressive, but also not too flashy. And you all gotta know, I love the flashy stuff by now. Speaking of flashy, let's look at the Ruin's Greatsword. It absolutely destroys both Radagon and Elden Beast. Considering that both are less resistant to magic than they are to holy damage, this has some great damage potential. Elden Beast also gives plenty of times to actually use the Ash of War, since his attacks are so slow. In the case of my recommendation, again, yes. Another 100% recommendation with absolutely nothing bad to say about this weapon. The Ash of War is sick and moderately useful, while the unique Charge R2 is an awesome addition that I wasn't expecting before actually using it. However, that's probably not news to you, since this weapon is often referred to as a noob favorite. So in that case, definitely use it. The weapon is powerful and fun. Who cares what some sweaty nerds want to say about it? I know I'm going to try it out again in a future run myself. Although, probably not for a video. Next, we've got the Bolt of Grandsax. The best weapon! No, I can't keep that up for this long. The Fireball Blue Chew cocktail have long worn off by now. And well, the best thing about this weapon is almost entirely useless against Radagon, and also way too FP hungry to be useful against Elden Beast. So let's get to the recommendation. To start, this is still one of my favorite weapons in the game. It is so fucking cool, but I have to admit that it does not have any stagger potential and is easily one of the weakest among the legendary armaments. That being said, I would still recommend the Bolt for any playthrough that is hopefully earlier than Journey 7, although I wouldn't exactly recommend any weapons for a Journey 7, or a Journey 7 or higher at all, but that can come down to the final conclusion. Almost finished, the Marika Executioner's Blade continues to be the worst weapon of this entire experience. It's still not as difficult as Godskin Duo, considering that at no point did I need to summon help again, but it is certainly one of the most difficult Elden Beast and Radagon fights so far. However, much of the difficulty of this playthrough could be coming from the fact that it is at the max difficulty possible in Elden Ring. That being said, I cannot recommend this weapon in any way. The Ash of War is plenty flashy, but the final slash gives it a terrible end lag. Otherwise, the Executioner's Blade is little more than an underwhelming greatsword that deals a small amount of magic damage. There are much better options, even among specifically legendary armaments. Finally, Radabeast with the Dark Moon Greatsword. My favorite weapon ever, and the strongest weapon of this run that has made this entire final playthrough a victory lap against literally every other boss. How does it stack up? Well, it makes pretty quick work of Radagon, thanks in part to the Frostbite and the returning ability to actually land a stagger. This weapon is a monster and I love it. But against Elden Beast, this is one of the toughest fights in this entire run. Nothing really compared to Godskin Duo with the Marika Blade, but still. I don't know if it was the nerves of this being the final fight in the run, or the fact that I was up until 2 AM trying to finally get this done, but Elden Beast gave me more of a beatdown than he has done in a long time. More often than not, the culprit was some combination of Elden Stars and some other attack synergizing in the worst way to completely body me. Although sometimes it was as simple as a couple missed rolls and running out of heals. All that to say, I still eked out a dub and finally put this whole thing behind me. Oh, and would I recommend my favorite weapon ever? It was never in doubt. My guiding moonlight will always be right at the side of those willing to follow. So, final thoughts time, while I burn through the remembrances I've been collecting through all these runs. If it hasn't been made obvious yet, the legendary armaments are kind of disappointing, especially considering the status of legend that they've been given. At least half of them don't really get interesting Ashes of War. And of the cool ones, some of these special weapons struggle to stand out among the crowd of unique weapons throughout Elden Ring. That being said, I might have added the Ruins Greatsword to my list of favorites now. However, on a separate note, this is also my very first time running this deep into New Game Plus cycles of any Souls-like, FromSoftware or otherwise, and the first time going into Journey 2 at all for Elden Ring. That being said, the increased difficulty cycles were both exactly what I was always expecting, but also nowhere near as hard as I expected it to get towards the end. I mean, I think Journey 7 and on, where the difficulty escalation ends, is extremely tough. Regardless, I'm certainly less afraid of heading into Journey 2 through 4 now, although I will say that Elden Ring does kind of drop the ball with this escalation, both with not doing enough to modify gameplay in later cycles, and also the reverse progression of weapons. Any fully upgraded weapon will stomp the early game, but then starts to struggle the further in we get, to the point that fighting Godric and Renala became more of a minor inconvenience than actual bosses. So yeah, New Game Plus is a mixed bag that I've never been a huge fan of. Although, Some games have really escalated the concept a lot better. That list includes Dark Souls 2, by the way, one of the best compliments I actually have for the game, although I still think Surge 1 and 2 do it the best. But hey, that's a story for another time. And before I see you soon, it's time for some Patreon shoutouts. Our patrons receive special rewards as we continue to make content here at DevBox. This includes getting early access to videos, having your name in the credits here, and for those who pledge $5 or more, they'll get their names read out loud, such as Azul. Thanks for helping to support the channel so we can keep looking into our favorite games. See you soon.